President, it seems that I am coming to the floor of the Senate on a more increasing basis or increasing frequency to honor the pioneering men and women who arrived in the state of Alaska prior to statehood, who truly have left a lasting impression on the history of the 49th state. And today I rise to remember the Venerable Norman H.V. Elliott. Father Elliott was an Episcopal clergyman. He arrived in Alaska back in 1951. And he was truly a profound spiritual force in Alaska from the day that he arrived in our state until his death on Friday, September 9th of this year. Father Elliott passed at the age of 97. And to say that he lived his life to the fullest would be a huge understatement. Father Elliott lived a life as big as the state of Alaska, and we reflect upon that life. It would be no overstatement to characterize Norman Elliott as a true Alaskan icon. Father Elliott was born in England. He moved to Detroit, Michigan when he was 4 years old. And according to the stories, he decided very, very early on, about middle school age, that he wanted to enter the ministry. But that future was somewhat interrupted by World War II. Father Elliott was drawn to military service, and after considering the possibility of joining a Canadian Forces battalion in neighboring Windsor, Ontario, he chose the U.S. Army instead. He was assigned to a new experimental light infantry division, which was patterned after a German light division. And after training in the swamps of Louisiana and California's mountains, he was deployed to Europe. Initially deployed to France, he fought in Luxembourg and Germany. I had an opportunity to come to know Father Elliott very well over the years, but he, several years back, agreed to sit for an interview as part of our Veterans Spotlight series. This was an oral history project that I sponsored to capture the stories of Alaska veterans, and we worked this in conjunction with the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. And in that interview, Father Elliott talked about the realities of the war at the time, and he said, "I remember good times, I remember bad times, I remember times where I barely escaped by the skin of my teeth. You never forget. I remember, and there are things that I wish I had done or didn't do, but I hope that as a whole, Alaskans remember what we did, because as a nation, we are losing our remembrance of World War II." Well, Father Elliott never let us forget our veterans, whether it was our veterans that fought honorably in World War II or the returning men and women who are coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan. Father Elliott's history after the war took him to Alaska. He attended the Virginia Theological Seminary, and he intended to serve as a missionary in India, but there wasn't a slot available there for him. But there was one in Alaska. India, Alaska. Father Elliott ended up in Alaska. His first stop was at St. Mark's Episcopal Mission in Nenana. This was a church and a boarding home for Native children. And then he went to St. Barnabas Mission in Minto and St. Stephen's Mission in Fort Yukon. And over time, his responsibilities expanded to missions throughout the Gwich'in communities on the upper Yukon. Communities like Eagle, Circle, Chalkitsik, Arctic Village, Venati, Beaver, and Stevens Village. And to cover this very, very large territory, Father Elliott would often travel by dog sled. He became a pilot, flew his own aircraft. I think he called this yellow plane the Drunken Canary. But Father Elliott was truly as unique as Alaska itself, in the words of one of his parishioners. But his duties in these villages were hardly romantic. Father Elliott was forced to confront with the dual scourge of alcohol abuse and suicide, and the loss of faith that comes with despair. As a member of the Joint Federal State Commission on Alaska Natives in the 1990s, he encouraged a shift in government policies towards Native people. And instead of the government doing for Native people and doing things perhaps poorly, he believed that the Native people themselves needed to be heard, and he was an incredible advocate in so many ways. He was more than just your village priest, though. In various villages, Father Elliott would come in and do whatever task was needed. And in an article in our local newspaper, the Alaska Dispatch, just a couple days ago, it was reported this way. Father Elliott did every kind of task. He was a policeman, a tax collector, a school teacher, a delivery person, and a messenger. When he arrived in one village to do church services, he first vaccinated everyone first for typhoid. He usually carried penicillin in his sled bag, giving anyone who needed it an injection in the rump, including any sick dogs on the team. Now that is an individual who cared for everyone in whatever the capacity. After being in the remote interior of the state, Father Elliott's next assignments were in relatively urban corners of Alaska. In 1958, Father Elliott moved to southeast Alaska, where he served at St. John's Church in Ketchikan. And in 1962, he settled in as rector of All Saints Episcopal Church, a beautiful church in downtown Anchorage. Father Elliott officially retired in 1990 when he reached the age of 70, in accordance with the church rules. And that might be the end of the story there, but it's hardly the end of the story for Father Elliott. 2 years after his retirement, All Saints needed a replacement priest, and he came out of retirement as something that they called priest in charge and continued to serve until earlier this year. Father Elliott was one of those who was everywhere. He was at every social gathering. He was at every wedding, every funeral, baptisms, everything in between. And he would visit those in the hospital. At times he would stay all night. He had this uncanny sense of knowing when they were in the hospital because he was very often the first one to visit. Well, Father Elliott ended up in the hospital earlier this year. He was down with pneumonia, and it was a bit ironic. I went to visit him. He was really pretty grumpy, and he was grumpy because he knew the hospital in and out, but he didn't like being the one that was confined in the bed, and he was grumpy because he had places to go and people to see. As I recall, he had a funeral to go to and a wedding to go to, and when he got out of the hospital, he resumed that active schedule. But I remarked, and I have remarked often, that Father Elliott lives every day to its fullest, from the time he wakes up in the morning to the time that he goes to bed at night. And his is a life well lived. And last week, Father Elliott passed away. And that, I'm afraid, is the end of his story, at least the end of the story as we know it here on this earth. Father Elliott served his church, his nation, and his community with great distinction, and his was indeed a life that was well lived. I have so many wonderful memories of my friend, Father Norman Elliott, and that will sustain me, but I cannot help but observe that with Father Elliott's passing, another of Alaska's great and mighty trees has fallen. I will be in Alaska this weekend, and on Monday we'll have an opportunity to join with Alaskans from around the state in paying a tribute to a man who truly lived a life of service to others, who truly cared in a way that goes almost beyond description. So I stand with my colleagues and ask that we join in prayers for Father Elliott and the family of truly a great Alaskan. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.